What's up, guys? It's Afro Angie for Kingdom and Community. If you are new, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. On this channel, I'm pretty much just documenting the lifestyle of an entrepreneur, activist, and filmmaker. And today we are back with another book review. Today we're going to be covering the book Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery by Dr. Naeem Akbar. I really hope that that's how you pronounce his name. It reminds me a lot of The Miseducation of the Negro. And if you haven't read that book, I also do have a book review of that on my channel as well. And Dr. Carter G. Woodson, he was a really good author. I felt like he was a great storyteller. I feel like he explained really well what was plaguing our community, right? But since he was speaking to a crowd that he presumed would already be educated, or as he put it, miseducated, he uses a lot of really big words and he speaks like to the academia crowd, right? Which I love. But I also really enjoyed this book because it's much shorter. It's only 65 pages. I think that he could speak to anybody. I think he could speak to somebody off the streets who may not have had the best education. I think that he could still help anybody understand what's plaguing our community. I have a lot of respect for that. And that's why I wanted to do a review on this. I also recommended this book to someone who was looking to start their activism journey and they were wondering, what book would be a great book to start with. I recommend this book. Let's get right into it. If you guys know me, you guys know I always try to have some notes for y'all. So if I'm looking down, I'm looking at my notes, okay? Now, I'm not going to cover that last chapter or that last section because I think that we talk a lot about this enough in today's times. It's pretty much just how, especially from a Christian perspective, we see, what we are supposed to see as the highest standard for life, for morality, for the afterlife. We see that as people who don't look like us, right? But we're told to follow that. To take it a step further, not only are we supposed to follow that, but those are actually not even true descriptions of, the Christians that we study in the Bible. I think that we talk enough about that in today's time, so I don't really feel the need to cover that chapter or that section, but it is in this book if you are interested. I think it's a conversation that we're having more in today's times, that even though slavery ended a long time ago, we definitely still suffer from the effects, especially psychologically in our communities. It goes a lot deeper than I think what the average person might consider on an everyday basis. He comes out the gate swinging, y'all. One of the things that he talks about is work, right? So, of course, we were on the plantation, and I say we because I am a descendant of slavery here in America. When we were on the plantation, work was seen as this negative thing. We didn't have a choice. We didn't make any money from it. Everything that work was associated with came with so many negative things. We don't really like to work now either. We, as in everybody in the world, especially in the 2020 time period. We're talking about the Great Resignation, working from home, all that stuff. So work is just not pleasant, period, right? But if you've ever heard the stereotype that African Americans are lazy and that we don't want to work, things that I personally don't agree with, but he says that there might be some truth to that because of the way that work was associated, generationally. As the generations evolved from the plantation, we did kind of adapt a sort of contempt for wanting to work. And so whenever, the government introduced welfare and things like that, that was a easier alternative because we were tired of working for free anyways. And then when we did get jobs, of course, we already know we were overqualified and underpaid, things like that, right? And so that attitude that people say that African Americans have stereotypically towards work, the author says does have some merit and of course ties to the plantation. Just like we all enjoy volunteering because we have a choice to volunteer and we feel like, we're doing something good, right? Whereas on the plantation, of course, you guys already know this, but they didn't have a choice and it was all to benefit, the capitalist society of America or whoever owned the slaves. They didn't get anything. They didn't even get any personal gratification unless they were brainwashed into being a good slave who did the most work, because that was a thing as well. but that natural pride that humans look for to do any work, right? Even if it's a low paying job, at least you're getting something. Or if it's a low paying job but it's benefiting your community, at least you get that satisfaction that you're making a difference. We didn't have that, and so because of that, it became something that was associated the same way as punishment, because it was a form of punishment, and we would get punished for not working enough. So as much as I hate to hear that stereotype that, you know, Black people can be lazy and don't want to work, there is merit to that, according to this author, and I think that he makes a good point. And he even goes to say on another page that even in our society today, we still work for other people and we don't really work for ourselves. Now that goes off into another topic about how we're still kind of mentally conditioned to not necessarily be producers, but to continue to be consumers. That's something that we could actually reverse, but since we haven't done that on a large scale yet, we still don't see work as something that's helping us, you know, on the same scale that it was used to help build this country. So there are some internalized feelings about work. And this is definitely not to say that all Black people are lazy or all Black people feel this way about work, but for those that we might consider lazy, there is a reason for that. The next point in the psychological legacy of slavery that he brings up is property. So he says that African Americans have the slavery influence of having mixed feelings towards property. And I think that we definitely see this because on one hand, it's like property is associated with status. If you have like flashy material items, it gives you that same feeling of how the master had property. We wanted to have, let's just call it what we say in real life, white man's money, right? Or the white man's success. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but that is the attitude that people had when they wanted to make it, especially when they were on a plantation. But on the other hand, those who don't have property, you see them vandalizing, they want to steal, they may not take care of their things because they feel like they don't really own it. We especially see this in what we would call the hood, right? Where you have like Section 8 housing or projects, they're not really taken care of very well. And it's because we feel like they're really not ours and they're just another reminder that we don't own anything. So you have those mixed feelings of like, we want it, right? We want to feel like we made it, but when we're not there yet, sometimes we feel like it's just another reminder of how much we haven't made it. I hope I'm explaining that well. And I think that this really explains why you will see, like in our community, right? Sometimes the people who have the least amount of money and the most amount of debt will still have the most flashy car. They'll still have sometimes the knockoff name brand stuff because we want to feel like we have arrived. The next point he talks about is leadership. This is really, really sad, but again, something we can definitely see in our society. So of course, naturally, any human in any race in any society does not like authority, right? From the time a child is like in their terrible twos, they want to do stuff themselves. So the objection to leadership isn't just something that only Black people have, but it definitely has been heightened by the atrocities of slavery. One of the things that he goes on to talk about is how not only is this like a natural thing, like we already didn't want to be on these people's plantation and now you're trying to tell us what to do. Not only is that taboo enough, right? But those who actually wanted to make a difference for their people were like visibly and terribly punished. So that was a red flag. So now it's like, we don't need you trying to get us in trouble. Pipe down, just keep your head down, do what you need to be told to do, right? And also sometimes like the masters or the overseers would like plant these ideas that if someone was trying to take the lead, that they were uppity and arrogant. That's also, you know, human nature, so it's not hard to convince somebody of that. But that was another way to make sure that the slaves didn't come together and unify. Not only that, but of course there were benefits to snitching, right? The slaves that would snitch or tell might not have to get whippings. They may get something from the big house. They may get to go inside and not pick cotton or whatever the plants they're picking for a day. Like, there are benefits to making sure that the master's property was secured, right? Just like there's, if you know who stole something or who did something, there can also be a reward in today's times. It was the same way on the plantation. And so all these things combined kind of formed a disrespect for natural leadership unless they were supplied with like a mysterious token power. So like sometimes overseers might be a black person and they might get to wear like the master's clothes or be in the big house, and so they have these symbols of status, like they made it. And so naturally people want to listen to that because they want to be in their shoes too. They feel like this person is doing something right when the whole time they're really just a token person. And again, we see that today in general, especially in this country. It's much easier to make it, arrive, have wealth, have everything that people want when you play by the system's rules. When you're trying to go against the system because you see the flaws in it or you want to do what's best for your people, the system is not going to help you out. And so people are less likely to listen to you because they don't want to be at the bottom. They're trying to get to the top. So if people supply who they want to be the speaker with all these things that they know people want, they're more likely to get their attention. And that's how you have leaders who really don't mean well, but get people's attention. And I want you to think, and I said this in my Miseducation of the Negro book review as well, think of some of our favorite social media blue check personalities. I'm not saying that every single one of them is wrong and is flawed, right? Because one day I might have a blue check, and I hope that y'all know I mean what I say. I'm down for the cause, for real, right? But think about some of the things that they say and think about, does this help the community? Right? Are they just talking about stuff? Are they just adding fuel to the fire? Or are they rolling up their sleeves and putting in the work? Are they actually trying to bring tangible differences? Or are they just repeating the talking points that keep us distracted? And I'll let you guys decide that for yourselves. I don't have any names to give you. I just want you all to think about that as a way to prove that this is something that still happens today. All right, so next we have the clown. The opposite of the leader is the clown. This is a point that hit home for me because as an activist, I have been told I am too serious. I need to lighten up, right? That is also something that comes from the plantation. And this is not to say that only Black people play too much, right? But it's definitely a form of coping mechanism to the point where we can't get anything done because everybody just wants to laugh. They just want to be entertained. They just want to have fun. This is something that also stemmed from the plantation. Even though it's something that we enjoy, you know, having fun, laughing, and cackling, this is actually something that is very derogatory. It's like when you teach a dog a trick and you're like, good boy, like you made him do that thing and he's entertaining you. That's a form of superiority, and that is what the people who own the slaves, the people who own America do to us, right? The comedians who make jokes about other Black people, even though, you know, sometimes they're funny, haha. But when they do that and that's like their whole brand, or the people who are like the stereotypical characters like the modern day minstrel show, even though they're getting paid good money, right? And they're making us laugh, they're still showing their inferiority because they have to do that in order to be okay. They're like another dog doing tricks. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful because, you know, who doesn't like to laugh? But this is something that comes from the plantation. And on one hand, right, some people do definitely use this for good reasons, because this is also another point of human nature. Nobody wants to be serious all the time, right? Everybody wants to enjoy life. So if you know how to make the person that is harming you happy, you can sometimes win and manipulate the situation. But a lot of times it's not us who's manipulating the situation, it's us who is being manipulated. And again, it was a survival tactic, right? If you could laugh, you could probably do less work. You could perform in the big house. You get special privileges because you're making the master laugh. And so everybody wanted to be the person who was funny. But now we can't get anything done. It's kind of like the class clown who wants to make everybody laugh because he's actually not that good with his work. And this is not to say that everybody who's a class clown isn't good with their work. I know I'm always like over explaining myself, right? But if y'all only knew the type of people, the type of comments I get sometimes when I tell y'all what these books say. I'm not trying to comfort anybody. I just want you guys to understand truly, you know, what is really going on in our situation. So, yeah, like, it's not to say that everybody who makes jokes and can laugh is dumb, because sometimes the smartest people don't have the kind of intelligence that it takes to crack a joke. And I'm one of them, okay? I need to learn how to make people laugh, how to be more funny. I'm not good at that yet, right? But a lot of people who are good at that are people who want everybody to be as distracted as they are so that they don't feel bad. And that is what has happened to our community. And the people who owned slaves knew that. So that's why they, you know, kept that going. I think it's very interesting how right after the author discusses leadership, he discusses the stereotypical clown. The enemy of the leader isn't the person who doesn't agree with the leader. It's the person who makes everybody distracted from what the leader is trying to do. And that's definitely what the clown does. Personal inferiority. This is how, like, we don't like our natural hair. We make fun of people who are too dark skinned. We make fun of our communities, the hood where we live. We make fun of our schools. We make fun of the way we talk. We literally do not like ourselves. Of course, not all of us. I love me some blackness. I love me some everything about us. Even when it doesn't match what people say the standard is, I feel like it's a sign of survival. Like, we still here, we still made it, and we still rocking, right? But in general, we don't like that. The things about our community that make us distinct and unique are things that when we feel like we want to make it, we do our best to disassociate from. Also, going to the plantation. I don't have to go too in detail about this. I think it's obvious that nobody wants to be on the bottom, and slaves were definitely the bottom of the bottom. So of course we wouldn't want anything to do with that if we weren't trying to, you know, be on top again. But that's so true, because, you know, I advocate for us to like rebuild our communities and things like that, right? And so many times I get the pushback of, it's not that easy. We can't do it because of the system. But who created this system? Human beings. What are we? Human beings. It's not like we woke up one day and America was what it was, right? They had to do a lot of work. It was dirty work, and I don't think we should do dirty work. But it wasn't easy for them to establish this country to be what they wanted it to be. We are fully capable of doing that, but we have believed that we have to be like them in order to be great. And I think that not only do we rob ourselves, but we rob the world of the talents that are hidden inside of us. Something else that Carter G. Woodson spoke about in his Miseducation of the Negro. All right, next point, community division. Again, common sense stuff, house slave versus field slave. You know, and this is stuff that we already know, like the people who are the haves and the have-nots. He's pretty much just going into more detail like on that kind of thing, and how this is a manufactured thing that the slave owners did in order to reinforce themselves as the superior person. We see this. He's describing what we would call an Uncle Tom, which the correct, you know, description of that is actually a Sambo. But if you say Uncle Tom, you know what I'm trying to say. A sellout, somebody like that. And they usually have good reasons, right? But that's also something that's manufactured, because now it weakens the credibility of the majority, especially once they're supplied with like tokens and like status and wealth. It's like, well, this person is saying this and they made it, so what's your excuse? When the whole time, like, that's their plan. And then what he says is the most damaging impact of psychological slavery is the destruction of the family. This is something that Martin Luther King also talks about in his book, Where We Go From Here, Chaos or Community. I also have this book review on my channel if you're into that. Basically he says that like the whole concept of family, right? Marriage, love, unity, none of that was allowed on the plantation. And so today we see this so bad. We see like black women and black men going at it on Twitter, especially. Oh, it's so toxic. But we just don't like each other. We're always talking about what black women aren't doing, what black men aren't doing. Again, it stems from the plantation. On the plantation, marriage was prohibited. And so the whole purpose of coming together was to breed for the master. So not only did we not like each other, even if a man did love a woman, he couldn't protect her, he couldn't provide for her, he couldn't make any money. And if he tried to protect her, they probably would both get killed. Then they had these kids, right? And sometimes the people who made it, well, most times, they didn't love each other. They were doing what the master told them to do because they needed more slaves to maximize their profits. Because not only now could you have more workers who could give you more crops and more, money, you could also have a child that could be sold, and that's an instant profit. That's pure profit for the owners of the slaves. And so then the child itself becomes a burden because they didn't want this child. They didn't want to be pregnant. They're doing this, everything about what we consider family, love, marriage, all of that had no purpose for benefiting the slaves themselves, but it was all for the master. And to enjoy it was prohibited. I don't believe that we should tolerate abusive men or men who don't do their part, right? There are a lot more men who probably are trying, but psychologically they're suffering from the effects of the plantation. That kind of explains why a lot of black men, they only care about money. They don't really care about, and I'm not going to say all black men, but it's very common for a lot of black men to not understand the emotional aspect that's important in a relationship. Because from the plantation, they were just supposed to make babies and make money for the master. So even in today, and this is no disrespect to athletes, because if that's a dream, I definitely support anybody chasing their dream. But so many black boys just want to play ball. They see that as making a lot of money, and so they don't mind pretty much having their gifts and talents pimped out by these major sports corporations, because that's what we're told. We're supposed to just make somebody else money. We're supposed to work as hard. We're supposed to be the strongest, be the fastest. It's very much like dog breeding, and it still happens. It's just in a different kind of way. And even though we're getting paid today, right, it pales in comparison to how much people are getting paid off our backs, off of our labor. Then he also goes to talk about how we're supposed to just make babies, and that can explain how our culture sometimes is super sexualized, especially in our music and in our TV. Because even though we're not on a plantation in general today, we already know there's a school to prison pipeline, and in the prison industry, pretty much you work for free. So the more babies you have, the more disrupted the community is, the higher the chances of having more free labor in these prisons. And that goes back to the plantation. It's so deep, y'all. It's so deep. If you're watching this, you already know. The last section in this psychological legacy of slavery is color discrimination. Again, I'm not going to go into that. I think we already know. You know what I'm saying? We see that all the time. Light skin versus dark skin, good hair, bad hair. We already know that. Now let's get into the good stuff. The good stuff. Because all that stuff happened and it's really bad. It's really sad. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And this is why I like this book. I think that Dr. Carter G. Woodson did a good job of this in the Miseducation of the Negro. But I don't think he spent as much time going into detail like this author did. He talks about, okay, we know the problems, right? This is how we can fix it. And that's what we all need to know. How can we fix it, right? I hope I can do this a little bit faster, y'all. I didn't expect this video to be so long because this book is tiny, but it's so good. I wish everybody could read this. I wish even racist people could read this because I feel like it explains so much. Knowledge of self. I think that we have done a great job of this in the recent years. This is my personal opinion. Everybody kind of interprets this a little bit differently, but I think that we are definitely starting to talk about things like who we are and how we got in this place, even if it's not like being talked on the, level that it should be. The conversations are being had, and I see that a lot more from my generation than I did when I was younger. And maybe something every generation says, but I'm happy with it, right? Okay. And what's really ironic about this is people actually don't want this. Like, we like to have a good time, right? So it can be very tricky to do this, to share this information about ourselves in a way that is still light. And even then, it's not going to be received as well, because since we still largely have these change on our minds as a community, we don't really want to hear that, okay? So like, I think about people like Beyonce, extremely popular, probably one of the best performers of our time. When she released that Black is King, I think that album did like the worst of any album she's ever put out. And she was doing what this book says, right? Putting out knowledge of self, putting out healing music, even like conscious rappers. We don't really see a whole lot of conscious rappers. My husband is one, String Tie Shy. But they don't get those plays, right? Because we just don't really want to hear that. However, that is still the solution. Even like me doing book reviews on my YouTube channel, right? I do, some of you all watch it, appreciate you if you're here, but in general, this is not something people my age especially are trying to see. They're not trying to learn about how we can improve ourselves. But if we still keep putting it out, eventually, when it's the right time for those who need to hear it, at least it's going to be there for them to hear it. And maybe the next generation will benefit from us putting this out there. The next point is celebration. Now, this is so important because, as I was just saying, we don't really like sitting still and learning, and you know what I'm saying? That's just not what anybody likes to do. It's just like kids. Kids don't like going to school. They like recess. So if you can make things fun, you win. And if you can celebrate yourself, now you don't feel so bad to be Black. Now you don't feel like Black is such a bad thing. And so that's why I love, like, again, my girl Beyonce, when she did that homecoming documentary / concert. It was a fun thing, and she was able to incorporate the cultural significance of HBCUs. I've seen a lot more movies like Black Panther, things like that make Blackness cool and fun and exciting. That is going to help us unlock the chains, because anytime you see something as beautiful, you're going to value it more, right? Like, if you're in what we call the hood, you're more likely to litter. But if you go to like Beverly Hills or something, you're gonna take care of your stuff. You're gonna make sure you don't throw no trash on the ground, because there's no trash there, and you don't want to be the one that puts it there. But also, you're gonna feel like trash shouldn't be there, right? So when we value things, we treat them better. So when you have a good time and when you associate yourself as something pleasant, something to have a good experience with, now you're more likely to want to know how you can take care of yourself, how we can take care of our community. So celebration is a very good point. And I think that that's something that more of our leaders should incorporate, is celebration. The next point in the liberation section is courage. Only the brave need apply. We just talked about celebration, how we need to have a good time, how we need to have fun, right? But the truth is, it is a little scary. It's a little scary. And I can say this as somebody who's speaking from experience. Because as we were discussing on the, part about knowledge of self, these are things that people don't want to hear. I hate to say it, but we have become extremely comfortable with these chains on our mind. It goes back to the plantation, like we were talking about in that leadership section. Those who want to be leaders and do good, they get punished, whether it's by society, whether it's by the government, whatever. The powers that be are not going to make it popular for you to go against their grain, because they love their grain. They created their grain. So the same way that, it's important that we liberate each other, we're going to get some pushback from that. So it's important that we know that if we're going to sign up for that challenge, okay? Just to give y'all a little bit of personal experience, when I decided that I wanted to be an activist and I wanted to really go hard for my people, I lost so many friends, y'all. And looking back, like, I understand. If I put myself in their shoes, I get it, because I didn't have to do this. I was very fortunate. I could have been that Uncle Tom that we were talking about, okay? I could have been that sellout. I had so much access to the spaces, the tables that we want to beg to be at. I didn't have to beg. I could have just sat down. Like, I had it that quote unquote good, but I don't want to see it at somebody else's table. I want us to have a table, right? I want us to be able to invite other people to our table, because I think we have something to offer as well. But in doing that, I lost so many friends. I lost a lot of what you would call respect from people. I lost a lot of status in some people's eyes. But at the end of the day, God has still taken care of me. And as more and more people start to understand that these are conversations that we need to have, God is definitely restoring me. So that's just a little bit of my personal testimony. When you're called to do something, I think God will give you ways to still feel fulfilled. But it is lonely. And I also like that on page 40, he also goes to elaborate how, like, even in the Bible, right? When God delivers people out of something, they have to go through the wilderness. The children of Israel, I believe, were in the desert for like 40 years. The generation that helped them to leave Egypt didn't even get to see the promised land. Now, I don't think that that's going to be our story, because we are already so much farther along than like our grandparents, right? But this is something that you have to have the best intentions. And I'm not perfect. I still struggle sometimes, but there is a period of isolation, and you do have to be courageous if you want to start this journey. Okay, the next 2 points really, really fast. Unity. How come there are so many more Black billionaires, so many more Black people with wealth and money, but our community as a whole still looks how it looks? We're not freeing the community, but we call it progress because one or two of us have made it, and that's not how it's gonna be. And something else that I absolutely love that he says is, so we don't all have to think the same, right? Like, I'm fortunate I was able to have what we would call a good education. I was able to grow up around a lot of people who didn't look like me, so I can bring that to the table. But the person who didn't have the best education, the person who is from what they would call the hood or the streets, is equally as valuable as me in this fight for liberation, because we're speaking to different people in the same oppressed community. So I will not be able to reach somebody who's from the streets or the hood in the same way that somebody who's from there could. It's like speaking languages. Like, of course, most of us in America speak English, but if we were trying to free the entire world, right, I can't tell somebody you got to speak English if they speak Spanish, because they need to speak Spanish to the people who speak Spanish. So we don't have to all be alike. We just have to have the same mission in this process of liberation. Last point, most important point, Kingdom and community, is we have to have faith. And I think of the great leaders, right? Malcolm X, MLK. Malcolm X was, he practiced Islam. I believe that this author practices Islam, I'm not sure. MLK, he was a Christian. I think of Harriet Tubman, also a Christian. And so many people today, especially in our generation, want to talk about white man's religion, this and that. Valid points, but not true. Because just because it was enforced on us by a white person or the oppressor doesn't mean that the root of the faith itself is oppressive. Now, there might be things that we don't like in it. There might be things that we don't understand. As a Christian, it's a lot of stuff I don't understand, right? But as a whole, I find my faith extremely liberating. I find my faith very energizing. If I didn't have my faith, trying to be an activist, oh, y'all can hang it up. I'm telling you the truth, because why would you continue to fight for something if you don't believe there's anything outside of you? And you know, we see this now, we call it the universe, right? We a lot of us have abandoned the faith to seek the universe, but the principles are the same. And we have to think of something outside of ourselves in order to continue in this fight. And all of the progress that we see for ourselves in America as Black people, the people who led that progress were people of faith. I mean, I've had different types of faith, but they couldn't do this if they were just dependent on themselves. There's another section where he talks about religious imagery and racial confusion, which again goes back to the images that we see in the faith that we practice not looking like us, but also not being true descriptions of what we read in the text, right? And how that can mess up our confidence and just mess up the way we see ourselves. We just see ourselves as bad. But I think that that's something that we talk about enough, so I'm not going to get into that. But overall, I mean, I truly give this book a 10 out of 10. There's not many books that I do that with. Like, I probably would give The Miseducation of the Negro a 9 out of 10. This, 10 out of 10, okay? I think that anybody could read this in like a weekend, truly. But then again, you probably will have to reread it because it's just that good. But anyways, I hope that you all have enjoyed this book review. I did not mean for this to be so long, but I hope that you guys found it as insightful as I did. I truly love this book, and if you did enjoy this book review, please share it. I think that this is a transformational book that can really help our community in such a great way. If we just knew how much of what we're struggling with in our community is tied back to a situation that was outside of our control for real, maybe we would have more kindness with one another. Maybe we would take more initiative to undo that, because then maybe we would understand that even though all white people are not our enemy, the systems that have created us to be where we are is definitely the enemy. And if we don't fight against that, then we're just allowing that to be what it is. So I believe if you enjoyed this video, please share it, because I think this is something that more people should know about, hear about, and talk about, okay? Thank you so much for watching. And until next time, guys, seek the kingdom and serve the community.